So that just leaves the control option, and of course that was the choice that my shepherd made. So what are the pros and cons of the control option? Well, let's start with the short-term ones, right? The positives, the pros are everyone in the alliance gets to survive. Organics, synthetics, everyone gets to live. He doesn't have to sacrifice his synthetic allies. He doesn't have to sacrifice Edie or the Geth. He can end the war right here, right now, and nobody else needs to die. He doesn't need to alter everyone, so he doesn't need to change them into beings that don't need to fight each other. He doesn't need to rob people of their choice in that particular manner. So right off the bat, in the short term, it's the cleanest victory. The allies all win. And the negatives, the cons for this choice are pretty small, pretty insignificant, at least for someone like my shepherd. I mean, you could argue that making this choice does in fact mean that the elusive man was right all along, and that's slightly annoying, and I'll grant you that, although I would argue it's not quite the same. It's not just the fact that the elusive man wanted control for his own personal power, even if he tried to, make it seem like it was for the benefit of humanity. We all know that at some level it was because he had a desire for power, but he didn't just want to control the Reapers, he wanted to control people. Everyone. He was all in on the indoctrination sort of thing. Whereas my shepherd just wanted to control the Reapers, and he only wanted to do that to stop the war. But that does, of course, bring up an interesting negative: his attitude towards controlling the Reaper, or the Reapers, sorry. Because, of course, they are a sentient race. And we've already established that my shepherd did have some problems with the idea of controlling sentient beings, of changing them. Indeed, a key moment is when he's faced with the opportunity to either destroy some Geth, who are currently enemies, or alter their code and change them into Geth that might not want to fight the allies. And of course, he chose to kill the Geth off rather than rewrite them, rather than change them, because A, it seemed like the safer option at the time, and B, he is somewhat uncomfortable with this idea of altering a sentient being's mind, because of course that is the true core of what a sentient being is: their mind, their thoughts, their beliefs, the way they behave. That's who they really are. And if you alter that, you're more or less killing them anyway. So he was very uncomfortable with that. He saw the two choices as essentially very similar, in that you were killing off the being, the true essence of the being. But also, in the case of rewriting the Geth, he felt like it was a bit too close to playing God. It was a bit of a slippery slope. And so you might be forgiven for saying, well, isn't this the same thing? Because, of course, your shepherd is now controlling the Reapers, who are a sentient race. And that's true. But there are two things that come to mind with regards to that. The first thing is, my shepherd really does not view the Reapers with the same level of empathy that he might view the Geth. Now, this might be partly because he'd befriended Legion, and so now he began to see the Geth as being closer to people, to the organic races, whereas he wasn't seeing Reapers that way, perhaps because the Reapers were just viciously murdering everyone in the galaxy, but also maybe because they just seem very alien, very, they're very Lovecraftian. It could actually just be a sort of innate bigotry towards creatures that look like weird squids rather than the Geth, who, let's face it, are humanoid. He might well be showing a sort of, well, not racism, but a sort of an inherent bias towards bipedal entities. That is a possibility, although I do think it's more down to not really caring about the Reapers because he sees them as a massive threat and has never considered them as people. Or, they're not people, they're beings. Whereas he'd begun to think of the Geth that way. So when he made the choice about the Geth, he was far more aware of this moral dilemma, whereas with the Reaper, he really couldn't care less. Honestly, he couldn't care less about the Reapers at all. Is that a moral failing on his part? Maybe at some sort of higher intellectual level, yes, but in that moment, is there anyone really going to blame him for that? Because I'm not. But the second difference is far more important. Because whilst on the surface you could say there was some comparison, he's being asked to choose between destroying the Reapers or controlling them, where in the past he was asked to destroy the Geth or change them, and they may seem comparable, but they're not. Because in the case of the Geth situation, he was choosing two options that didn't really have any other negatives to, the allies. It wasn't as if, well, you could destroy the Geth, but if you do that, all the Quarians will die. Because if that had been the choice, if he'd been asked to choose, well, you can destroy the Geth, but all the Quarians will die, or you can rewrite them and the Quarians will live, he would have rewritten the Geth in a heartbeat. In spite of the fact that he would have seen it as a bit distasteful, it wouldn't have even crossed his mind to sacrifice the Quarians to sort of suit some moral discomfort he had at the idea of playing God with the Geth. He would have played God with the Geth in a heartbeat to save the Quarians. So the two situations are not the same. Because yes, Shepard could destroy the Reapers, and indeed that would have been his choice had he not had to sacrifice his allies. So taking control of them, as distasteful as that might be at some sort of higher level, really, it's not even comparable to, at least to my Shepard. So short term, this choice was a bit of a no-brainer. It really does seem like the best option. But what about long term? What are the long-term pros and cons of this choice? Well, the pros are pretty much all in the short term anyway for this choice. The con, of course, is the Reapers are still around. They are still potentially a threat. Yes, Shepard is currently controlling them, but it's not actually the real Shepard. It's a construct that has his thought processes. And so yes, you would hope this means the Reapers are going to be a force for good. And indeed, Shepard's thought process here is, I'm going to take control of the Reapers and fly them into the sun. Now we know, looking at the ending, that in actual fact he hung around and helped them rebuild. And whilst that was not what my Shepard was thinking, I'm going to admit that once I saw that, I did think to myself, you know what, I can imagine my Shepard going, oh, before I fly them into the sun, I'll just help you rebuild, because I can alleviate the pain and suffering. It's a very natural thing to do, so I could definitely see that happening, and so it is possible that the Reapers could still be around. And if they're around, they're still a potential threat. It is possible that something goes wrong and the Shepard construct gets destroyed and the Reapers go back to their default programming, their default thought processes. Or maybe he gets hacked or something like that. Or maybe over time he becomes corrupt. Maybe he starts to see problems in the galaxy and believes that he needs to interfere, and maybe that interference would get too oppressive. There's a whole host of possible what if, and then it goes horribly wrong. So with the Reapers there are an awful lot of scenarios you could create that sometime in the future would have the galaxy once more having to fend off the Reapers. Now, actually, this is a problem with the synthesis choice as well. I didn't think of this much at the time, but the Reapers are still around. Now, they are part organic all of a sudden, and so they no longer have the same outlook, probably. We're making a lot of assumptions as to what these hybrid organic synthetics would do. In the case of the Reapers, would it change their outlook? Maybe. But more importantly, their original purpose was to stop synthetics wiping out organics. And at that particular moment, there would be neither. Therefore, their purpose for existing has gone, so they need a new purpose. Of course, as I've pointed out, the rise of organic life and synthetic life once more in the galaxy is almost inevitable. Could their core purpose for existing still trigger them? Who knows? It's difficult to say. But here's the thing. We've suddenly got a huge number of new species, these sort of hybrid species, in the galaxy. One of them is a hybrid Reaper. Are we so sure that this hybrid Reaper is not going to, be a threat regardless? I mean, I know the synthesis ending definitely tries to sort of paint this picture of, oh, now we all get on with each other and we've got no reason for conflict. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy that argument, because where you have more than one sentient being, you will have reason for conflict. It's just how it works. And I'm afraid these new hybrid races will eventually find something to fight over. And the Reapers are still one of those races. So the whole idea of the Reapers still being a threat does actually cross over to one of the other choices as well. But I want to focus on the control option right now. But I'm going to accept that one of the big negatives for the control choice in the long term is that the Reapers are still around and therefore a potential threat. But there are two reasons that I do not believe that negative, that con, is as great or as overpowering a reason to reject this choice as you might think. Okay, so let's just go with worst case scenario. The Reapers are going to return. It's going to happen again, and they're going to come back in 10 years. This is bad. I will accept that this is not a good thing, but the Allies are still better off than they were 1 minute ago, a minute before Shepard makes that decision. He makes this decision and he says, right, destroying them comes at too big of a cost. We have to betray our allies and we have to basically commit genocide, so to speak, on synthetic life. Whereas if I do this, we get some time. I take control. Yes, the Reapers may come back. Yes, they may one day be a problem once again. But in the meantime, the Allies, the entire galaxy, have a chance to rebuild and prepare. And that is really important. Because imagine if the galaxy had 10 years. Imagine at the start of Mass Effect 3, the Reapers were invading Earth and everyone was, oh my god, it's all going to come to an end. And there was a giant button in front of Shepard that said, press here to delay war by 10 years. Would he have pressed it? Yes, in a heartbeat. He presses the button, now they get 10 years. No one can argue that the Reapers are not a thing now. Everyone's aware that the Reapers are a thing. You've got 10 years, let's go. But in fact, it's actually even better for the Allies at the end of Mass Effect 3, because Shepard has already brought them all together. They're all working together, and they will have successfully stopped the harvest together as a unified force. This is going to be important. This is going to be important. It will have proved that the galaxy working together can fend off the Reaper. They can fight back, but only if they work together. So what have you got now? You've now got an entire galaxy unified, aware of the Reaper threat, completely aware of the fact that it may return. Because make no mistake, if you and I are discussing the fact that maybe the Reapers will be back, maybe they still pose a threat, there are going to be a lot of people inside those different galactic species that are thinking the same thing. And they're all going to be preparing. So if something does go wrong, the Reapers do return, they will not have the element of surprise, and they will be facing an enemy that has already beaten them once and has had 10 years or maybe longer to prepare. So, best case scenario, he goes control and he does a bit of rebuilding and he flies the Reapers into the sun, threat gone. Worst case scenario, the Reapers come back in 10 years, but now they face an even greater enemy. To a soldier, that is still a win. You have to... I know a lot of people like to think of happily ever after. Oh, you've defeated your enemy forever and we will now head forward into a period of peace, but that just doesn't pan out. It never does. You're always having tragedy, then period of peace, tragedy, period of peace, and you're always going to have to be accepting that something is going to be a threat to the galaxy at some point in the future, right? Granted, you want to try and get rid of those threats one at a time. That is true. But sometimes what you do is you just push a disaster back. You push the floodwaters back, and you get a breather, and then slowly the floodwaters come back in, and once again you have to go back to doing. It's kind of like garbage, yeah. You've got to take the garbage out, you've got to dispose of it, but there's going to be more tomorrow. You're never going to completely get rid of garbage. And that does bring up the second thing. The idea that just because you kill off the Reapers, somehow you are safer than with the control option. Because as I mentioned when talking about the destroy option, you may end up destroying the Reapers and finding out that act is what causes the destruction of organics. Remember why the Reapers exist. They were a solution to a problem. The problem being there was a belief that synthetics were inevitably going to wipe out organics, that this was inevitable, and so the Reapers were the solution. They would somehow prevent the annihilation of organic life by harvesting it on a non-stop basis. Bit of a odd solution if you ask me, but that was their thought process. If Shepard had chosen to wipe out the Reapers and the synthetics, yeah, great. They've got a period of peace. They've got a period where organics are not under threat. But the idea that this is a permanent solution is insane. Because as I said earlier, the rise of synthetic life is almost inevitable. So it's going to happen again. And they will almost certainly learn what the organics did for their own survival. Now remember the Geth. Remember when they fought the Quarians. We now know it was actually more of a self-defense war from the point of view of the Geth, and indeed when they had the option to wipe out the Quarians, they chose not to. Will the next synthetics do the same? Will they have the same desire that the Geth had to actually make peace? Because what we saw throughout that entire series was a slow revelation that this entire war between synthetics and organics in our cycle was the organics' fault, so to speak. It was something that we had caused. So in the next, iteration, are the synthetics going to just be like, you know what? These organics, we know what they're going to do. Maybe we should just wipe them out. And thus, killing of the Reapers is the very thing that causes this future threat. So what I'm saying is long term, if we're looking at the cons long term, yes, the Reapers are still a threat, but there's always going to be some sort of threat. And whilst I will acknowledge a threat of the Reapers coming back is bad, sometimes the best option is to just keep pushing back the threat and fighting it and hoping you get better at fighting it each time, rather than perhaps take one solution that you think annihilates the threat only to open you up to a future threat that's even more difficult to face. I mean, again, we're in what if territory here, but that is what we're doing when we're talking about future negatives, about the threats that the Reapers might pose. So you can't sort of say, well, you know, the Reapers are still there, they're still a threat, so therefore it's a worse option than destroy, because at least with the destroy option you've got no threat. Well, it's just not true. It's just not how the universe works. There's going to be a threat, and there's a chance that that threat is going to be directly created by the choice you make now. However, I want to circle back to something I talked about at the start of this topic, and that is the fact that my shepherd made this decision in seconds. He did not have the luxury to sit down and spend, half an hour discussing the pros and cons the way we have. He had to consider them very quickly. Every second he delayed, thousands of people were dying, and so what thought he had towards the future would have been very, very basic, and it would have come down to, all right, my choices are betray the Geth, kill Edie, and remove the Reaper threat once and for all, and hope there are no future consequences of that. 2, rob everyone of any choice they have and just force a change upon them, and hope that that doesn't have major cultural, societal problems, and hope that somehow that means the Reapers don't actually want to, exercise power now all of a sudden and become a force for good. I mean, there's a lot of the whole synthesis one, trying to think of the long-term implications of the synthesis option as a soldier right in that moment, I think are just out of the question. I think are out of the question. And then looking at the control option and thinking, all right, yes, they're not gone and maybe they're a threat for the future, but at least everyone will have some time and we don't have to betray the Alliance. The Alliance will hold. The Alliance will be there. They will have won, even if temporarily, and they'll have time to prepare. I've given them the time they need. That's the best I can do. That is the best I can do. I've given them the time. I've kept the Alliance going. I've kept faith with the people that I promised I'd look after, and hopefully that will set the example for them. Hopefully they will take the torch that I pass on to them and they will run with it, and then they will forge the future. It's not me, Shepherd, forging the future for them right now, forcing a change upon them or wiping half of them out. I'm giving them time and saying, look guys, you've seen what you can do when you work together, and you've seen the threat that's out there. You've got some time. Use it well.